Welcome to our Christian Life and Ministry meeting for this week. To begin, we have an excellent song to prepare us for our treasures portion of the meeting. It's Song 40, To Whom Do We Belong, based on Romans 14:8. And after the song, we'll ask Brother Robert Reimer to open with a prayer. That's Song 40. It's a delight to be together again for our Christian Life and Ministry meeting. Last week, our Bible reading called Jehovah the God of gods. As such, he surely has the right to tell us how he wants to be worshiped. And that's the theme of our treasures talk today. We're going to see how the standards for worship set for the Israelites apply to our worship as well. In our Apply Yourself to the Field ministry portion of our meeting, we're going to focus on the quality of empathy. How can we display empathy in our ministry? We're going to see two beautiful examples of it, first in our ongoing story of Nita and Jade, and then in our initial call video. In our Living as Christians portion, we'll enjoy a local needs talk that will build appreciation for a special privilege that each of us can enjoy at our weekly meetings. Lastly, we're going to continue our fascinating discussion of Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. How has our understanding of that vision been clarified? We look forward to finding out. But now we want to give our attention to Brother Stephen Ward with the Treasures Talk. The theme he'll develop, How Jehovah Wants to Be Worshipped.
To make Jehovah happy, we need to know what he wants. We need to know how he wants to be worshiped. Well, Jehovah taught the Israelites how to worship him. Before they entered the promised land, they received special instructions from Moses. Those instructions are part of the inspired record in Deuteronomy. So we're going to consider how we can apply three aspects of Moses' instructions to our worship of Jehovah today. First, let's read together Deuteronomy chapter 11 and verse 13. This is part of the second of four final talks that Moses gave the people. So let's read together Deuteronomy chapter 11. Please read verse 13 with me. And if you will diligently obey my commandments that I am commanding you today, and love Jehovah your God, and serve him with all your heart and all your soul. Here, Moses instructed the people to obey, love, and serve Jehovah. Now, how important was this? It was essential. It was actually part of a divine promise. Please notice the word if at the beginning of verse 13. If you obey, love, and serve Jehovah. Well, if the people did these things, then what would happen? According to verses 14 and 15, Jehovah himself would take care of the people in the promised land. But according to verses 16 and 17, if they did not worship Jehovah correctly, then his anger would blaze against them. So the instruction in verse 13 reveals what Jehovah wants. He wants obedience. Please notice again the beginning of the verse. Moses said, diligently obey. In the language he spoke, he used words that literally referred to hearing or emphasized hearing. So he taught the people to pay close attention to Jehovah's commandments and carefully follow them. Diligently obey. So to please Jehovah, we need to diligently obey all his commandments in every aspect of life. Moses then said, love Jehovah your God. So Jehovah doesn't want us to obey him out of a mere sense of duty or obligation. He wants us to feel love for him and obey him out of love for him. Then Moses went on to say, serve him. So Jehovah wants us to do things for him. He wants us to give to him. But now, in what way does Jehovah want us to love and serve him? Please notice the final words of verse 13. With all your heart and all your soul. Moses referred to the heart. That represents the inner person, everything we are on the inside. That includes all our thinking, our feelings, our desires. So Jehovah wants us to cultivate real affection for him. He doesn't want us to just say we love him. He wants us to feel it. He doesn't just want lip service. He wants service from the heart. Jehovah doesn't want us to act like a waiter who is paid to serve at a restaurant. He wants us to act like an obedient child and a caring friend who acts out of love. Now then, after referring to the heart, Moses referred to the soul. Now that represents our whole being, everything we are, both inside and out. So Jehovah teaches us here by means of Moses that it's not enough to feel love for our God. We need to show our love for our God. Jehovah wants us to put love for him into our hearts, but he also wants us to put that love for him into our actions. So really here we learn how Jehovah wants to be worshiped. Jehovah wants us to obey, love, and serve him completely with all our heart and all our soul. Now, all of us can do this. For example, just consider one way in which we can render whole-souled service to Jehovah. We can all put our heart and soul into our ministry. We can cultivate the desire to speak of Jehovah in the ministry. We can put forth real effort into our telephone presentations, our letter writing, and other forms of the ministry. We worship Jehovah by obeying, loving, and serving him completely. Now let's consider another aspect of Moses' instructions in chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. Moses gave commandments, but really these commandments came from Jehovah. So please notice verses 2 and 3 of chapter 12. You should completely destroy all the places where the nations you will dispossess have served their gods, whether on the high mountains or on the hills or under any luxuriant tree. You should pull down their altars, shatter their sacred pillars, burn their sacred poles in the fire, and cut down the graven images of their gods, obliterating their very names from that place. Here we see what the Israelites should do in the promised land. That land was full of things used in false worship. Well, what should they do with those things? Verse 2, completely destroy them. Completely destroy them. In the land where they lived, the Israelites should tolerate no worship of false gods. In fact, they should even eliminate the memory of those false gods. The end of verse 3 says, obliterating their very names from that place. So we learn here that Jehovah wants us to reject false worship. We can't have any part in it, none at all. We can also help others to reject false worship. And that can include even destroying physical possessions that are connected with false worship. What does Jehovah want? He wants us to reject false worship. Now let's consider another set of instructions given by Moses in chapter 12, verses 11 through 14. Chapter 12, starting in verse 11. You will bring all that I am commanding you to the place that Jehovah your God chooses to have his name reside. Your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the contribution from your hand, and every vow offering that you vow to Jehovah. You will rejoice before Jehovah your God, you and your sons, your daughters, your male and female slaves, and the Levite inside your cities, for he has no share or inheritance with you. Be careful not to offer up your burnt offerings in any other place you may see. You should offer your burnt offerings only in the place that Jehovah chooses in one of your tribal territories, and there you should do everything I am commanding you. Here, Moses instructed the people on making offerings to Jehovah, and this would be a very happy thing. Verse 12 says, you will rejoice before Jehovah your God. And making offerings included all the people, their children, their slaves, the Levites, everyone. But how did Jehovah want the people to make their offerings to him? Unitedly, in the place he would choose, in the way he wanted. They could only do this in the place that Jehovah chose in their land. So we learn here something about how Jehovah wants to be worshiped. He wants us to worship him unitedly, together. Now, before the pandemic, we did this at kingdom halls, assembly halls, and conventions. But even during the pandemic, by means of video recordings and video conferencing, we worship Jehovah unitedly at our spiritual programs of worship. So we can make Jehovah happy by worshiping him the way he wants to be worshiped. And we've considered three things that Jehovah wants and practical ways to apply those things or do them in our worship of Jehovah. To review these points, please notice the photo in our midweek meeting workbook. We serve Jehovah whole-souled in the ministry. We reject false worship, and we serve Jehovah unitedly as brothers and sisters. Yes, we make Jehovah happy by worshiping him the way he wants to be worshiped. We make him happy by loving and serving him completely, by rejecting false worship, and by worshiping unitedly as brothers and sisters. That is how Jehovah wants to be worshiped.
Thank you so much, Brother Ward, for breaking down those three commandments for us and showing us in practical ways how we can give Jehovah the worship that he wants. Well, our Bible reading this week was Deuteronomy chapters 11 and 12. So we're looking forward to hearing the gems that you've gleaned from those chapters. Brother Daniel Stallo will lead us through this portion of the meeting.
We're looking forward to hearing everyone's well-prepared comments of this for this week. To get our spiritual gems underway, we'd like to ask for a reader for Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 29. Brother DiMolanta, could you read that for us?
When Jehovah your God brings you into the land you are to possess, you must pronounce the blessings on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal.
Thank you, Brother DiMolanta. Now, keeping that verse in mind, the question, how apparently was this verse fulfilled? Let's have Brother DiMolante again.
Well, interestingly, they were instructed to specifically station themselves in front of these two mountains. The tribe stationed in front of Mount Gerizim would respond to the blessings that were read there, while those stationed in front of Mount Ebal would respond to the curses.
Thank you very much, Brother DiMolante. That was well covered. We'll go to the expanded question. What spiritual gems from this week's Bible reading would you like to share regarding Jehovah, the field ministry, or something else? Let's start first with Sister Stallo, please.
Well, starting in Deuteronomy 11:18, the Israelites were told these words in a figurative sense, that they were to keep Jehovah's law constantly before them, and whatever they did and wherever they looked, it would guide their thoughts and actions. And I thought how important that is today when we're in Satan's wicked system and it's all around us, that we let God's word penetrate our heart and move us to have an appreciation for spiritual things. And then we can look for opportunities to talk with our friends and families and encourage each other, not just at times of worship, but all day in all of our activities.
Thank you very much, Sister Stallo. Could we have Brother Garcia, please?
In Deuteronomy 11:8 and 9, it teaches us that it wasn't the location or circumstance that was going to cause the land to flow with milk and honey, but it was their obedience to Jehovah. As long as they were going to remain faithful to Jehovah, they were going to receive Jehovah's blessing. So in a similar way, nowadays, Jehovah's blessing is not based on circumstance or location, but is based on our obedience to Jehovah. So we can be sure that no matter what our circumstances is or where we all can receive Jehovah's blessing.
Excellent comment. Sister Hines, please.
In chapter 11, verse 16, there's a clear warning from Jehovah telling Israel to be careful. He knew the Israelites would be tempted to learn local farming techniques from their more experienced neighbors, but a danger existed because the thinking of the Canaanite farmers would be influenced by their worship of the false god Baal, and that the Israelites could be enticed to taint or even abandon true worship, thereby damaging their precious relationship with Jehovah. The lesson for me is to be careful, not to allow any teachings of the world to damage my precious relationship with Jehovah.
Excellent point. Thank you very much, Sister Hines. And can we have Sister O'Brien, please?
In chapter 11, in verse 7, Moses says to Israel, "Your own eyes have seen all the great deeds that Jehovah did." And in the preceding verses, he recalls specific acts of Jehovah's saving power in their behalf. He knew helping them to recall these acts would benefit their faith and strengthen them for future trials, as well as benefit generations that were not eyewitnesses. So today, we're living in exciting times, seeing firsthand fulfillment of Bible prophecy. By imitating Moses, focusing on Jehovah's specific acts of salvation, we won't be overly distracted or discouraged as our trials intensify, and we'll have the privilege to share these eyewitness experiences.
Thank you, Sister O'Brien. Thanks for bringing that in for us today. Can we have Sister Peters, please?
Chapter 11, verse 10 to 12 shows me that even though Egypt was known for being agriculturally rich, the land that Jehovah had promised his people would be far more superior, drinking waters from the heavens and be cared for directly by himself. This shows me that Jehovah's blessing is far more than what we can imagine, and we wouldn't want to be sidetracked by the temporary enjoyments of the system when they are really nothing compared to Jehovah's permanent blessings.
Excellent. Thank you, Sister Peters. Could we have Brother Hines, please?
In chapter 11, verse 26, Moses tells the people, "See, I'm putting before you today a blessing and a curse." So this verse reminds us that one of the best ways we can show Jehovah that we love and appreciate him is by making wise use of our gift of free will, or our option to choose. When we make right choices, choices that reflect obedience to God's laws, we demonstrate that we love and we appreciate him.
Excellent point, Brother Hines. Thank you for bringing that out. Could we have Sister Ward, please?
The rains that God promised the faithful Israelites in chapter 11, verse 14 were not just a blessing, but an absolute necessity. The autumn rain in October softened the ground before planting and plowing, while the spring rain in April helped growing crops like grain mature and finally ripen. This reminded me that Jehovah, as a generous father, not only promises to bless us for our obedience, but also actively cares for all our basic needs as long as we remain obedient to him.
Thank you, Sister Ward. And can we have Sister Engel, please?
I appreciated the expression at Deuteronomy 11:12 also, that it is a land Jehovah your God is caring for. That would have been comforting. They knew that they would have what they needed and be provided for. But at the same time, those words were a good reminder that if they had success and the land prospered, they shouldn't think, oh, aren't we clever, and credit their own ingenuity. So Jehovah promises he'll care for us also, which is reassuring in the safest place we can be. But likewise, I want to remember that everything I have comes from Jehovah, and rather than feeling it's something I accomplished, always credit and thank him.
It's a good reminder for us all. Sister Gross, please.
In chapter 12, verse 23, it reminds me of how Jehovah protects and instructs his people, because here the Israelites are told to be firmly resolved not to eat blood. Similarly, Christians today must also be firmly resolved not to disobey God's law and to abstain from blood. This instruction should not be taken lightly, obeying only if it is convenient or presents no problems. But even though obedience can present its challenges at times, we know that our loving God Jehovah provides protection, direction, and support to keep our resolve in important matters like this.
Thank you, Sister Gross. Can we have Sister Miller, please?
I really appreciated Deuteronomy 11, verse 23, where it speaks of how Jehovah would drive away the nations from before the Israelites in possessing the promised land if they were faithful. And the cross-reference was for Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 5. And this verse really helps clarify why Jehovah drove these nations out. The verse in part says that it is because of the wickedness of these nations that Jehovah your God is driving them out, away from you. So Jehovah never destroys arbitrarily, but always is justified, and we must always trust his actions, even if we don't fully comprehend all the details.
Thank you, Sister Miller. It's good for us all to really think about. Can we have Sister Wright, please?
In ancient Israel, theocratic instruction was given verbally, for example, through Moses or by means of the priests and Levites or parents to their children. But regardless of who conveyed the instruction, it was imperative that the people remember, as Deuteronomy chapter 11, verse 22 says, that this instruction was given by Jehovah. So today, our theocratic instruction could come through our personal reading of the Bible, from parents, or from appointed men in the congregation. So to maintain our appreciation for this, we really need to keep our perspective vertical and remember that our instructions ultimately are coming from Jehovah, who's the great educator.
Thank you very much, Sister Wright. And Brother Harris.
I really enjoyed the comment in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 32, where Jehovah told them about his commandment, that they should not add to it nor take away from it. And it made me think about a dietitian who creates a special diet for someone, and it's made specifically for that person, with their thoughts in mind, with the way they live their life. And so if they were to add to it, it could throw off the balance, or if they could take away from it, it wouldn't be effective. In the same way, Jehovah's commandments were made specifically for us, for how we should live our life. If we add to it, it become burdensome and draw us away from Jehovah. But if you take away from it, it won't be sufficient to protect us. So we want to be sure that in everything we do, we always follow Jehovah's commandments directly as he wrote.
Thank you for highlighting that point as well. I believe, was it Brother Reimer?
Yes, I appreciated Deuteronomy 12, verses 29 and 30. It used the term entrapment, which is a little unusual to see in the scripture, but it showed that in Israelite times, they had to get rid of the pagan inhabitants, but they couldn't think about what their beliefs were later on, because they could end up getting curiosity and going into following those beliefs. The same could happen today. We can't be curious about apostates or anything else that is not the beliefs that we understand, because if we do, we could end up being entrapped just like Israelite was and go after the wrong direction.
Thank you, Brother Reimer. I'd like to thank everyone for your participation, and we'll hand it back over to our chairman.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brother Stallo, for leading us through that, and to all of you for sharing the fruits of your meditation with us. We really enjoyed all of your comments. Well, it's always a pleasure to hear God's word read aloud, isn't it? And this week, our assigned Bible reader is Brother Connor Soler. He's been asked to read Deuteronomy 11, 1 through 12. So please follow along as he reads those verses.
You must love Jehovah your God and always keep your obligation to him and his statutes, his judicial decisions, and his commandments. You know today that I am addressing you, not your sons who have not known or seen the discipline of Jehovah your God, his greatness, his mighty hand, and his outstretched arm. They did not see his signs and his deeds that he did in Egypt to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to all his land, or what he did to the armies of Egypt, to Pharaoh's horses and war chariots, which were overwhelmed by the waters of the Red Sea, when they were chasing after you, and Jehovah destroyed them once and for all. They did not see what he has done for you in the wilderness until you are coming to this place, or what he did to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the son of Reuben, when the earth opened and swallowed them up, along with their households and their tents and every living thing that followed them, before the eyes of all Israel. Your own eyes have seen all the great deeds that Jehovah did. You must keep the whole commandment that I am giving to you today, so that you may grow strong and cross over into the land to take possession of it, and so that you may live long in the land that Jehovah swore to give to your forefathers and their offspring, a land flowing with milk and honey. The land you are going to take possession of is not like the land of Egypt out of which you came, where you used to sow your seed and irrigate it with your foot like a garden of vegetables. But the land you are about to cross into and possess is a land of mountains and valley plains. It drinks the water that rains from heavens. It is a land that Jehovah your God is caring for. The eyes of Jehovah your God are constantly upon it, from the beginning of the year to the close of the year.
Beautifully done, Brother Soler. We enjoyed listening to your reading. You were working tonight or today on study 2, conversational manner. How do we apply that to Bible reading? Well, our teaching brochure makes this point. If our assignment is to read from the Bible or another publication, get to know the passage well so that your reading will be fluent. Now, no two people put words together in exactly the same way. So to make another person's words sound like our own takes practice. We need to read aloud and get it clearly in mind. And it was clear to us that you did that today. You put the effort into it to prepare in advance, and it showed by the fact that your reading was conversational. Of course, you were reading a portion of Moses' speech, and you put meaning into those words. So we appreciate so much the effort that you put into it. Thank you so much. Well, that takes us to the apply yourself to the ministry portion of our meeting. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to focus specifically on the quality of empathy. What exactly is empathy, and how can developing it help us to find joy in our ministry? Let's listen as Brother Joshua Peters helps us answer those questions.
Empathy is the key that can unlock the door to our kindness and compassion. But when you think about it, what exactly is empathy? Well, empathy is the ability to understand the thinking, feelings, values, and needs of other people. In fact, it's been described as the ability to feel someone else's pain in your own heart. Now, because we're drawn to this naturally beautiful quality, it's readily seen by other people when we do show it. But when we show it, we're really just reflecting how Jehovah feels about others, and in turn, that draws people to him, especially when we show that quality in the ministry. Now, interestingly, the word empathy doesn't actually appear in the Bible record, but the scriptures do allude to it numerous times. As an example, the Apostle Paul alluded to empathy when in Philippians chapter 2 and verse 4, he said, and I quote, as you look out not only for your own interest, but also for the interests of others. So we get the point, don't we, that we display empathy when we show genuine, heartfelt interest in other people. Let's see how our young sister Nita displays this quality of empathy in the following video. The video, please.
Sorry I'm late. It's fine. Is this mine?
My treat.
Oh, brilliant, thanks. I didn't have any breakfast.
So, we left off at paragraph 10.
Listen, I don't have it in me today. I got like 2 hours sleep.
You all right?
Just super stressed. Can't focus.
I'm really sorry.
My boyfriend, school, work, everything else. I just don't even have time to breathe.
When my schedule gets a bit crazy, I focus on organizing what I can.
How's that?
I give everything a proper place.
Yeah, I'm not really the organization type.
But I can help. I mean, if you want.
I guess a little help couldn't hurt.
So, how organized is your place right now? Okay. Well, with God, all things are possible. Where should we start?
You're the neat freak. You tell me.
Let's try and find the bed. We'll work from there.
What a good video that is. So friends, we're going to discuss some of the things we saw in the video by means of questions. Our first question is, how did Nita show empathy? First of all, when Jade was late. Let's begin with the Reimer family, please.
Well, she said, that's fine. And she didn't roll her eyes and say, oh, that's fine. It was genuine. She really meant it. And while she was waiting, she had even ordered something for her, anticipating she might be stressed if she's running late.
Very good. Thank you, Sister Reimer. Please, Brother Miller.
And that was really impressive because knowing Nita's personality, she maybe a little bit like us, we tend to be irritated if someone holds us up. Maybe they think their time is more important than ours, but she didn't react that way at all. As Sister Reimer mentioned, she really took the initiative to show empathy, to understand her circumstances, and even do that thoughtful little gift for her.
Very true. Please, Sister Stella.
And it wasn't just what she did do or say, it was what she didn't do or say. She said she didn't ask her when she came in, like, why are you late, or say anything about her being late. She just let Jade offer it.
Beautiful. Let's move on to our second question. And as our brother shows the illustration, if you'd like to include it in your comments, please feel free to do so. How did Nita show empathy when Jade said that she was too stressed to have her study? Please, start with the Ward family.
So she asked a simple question. She said, is everything all right? She didn't insist, and then she really listened.
Very good. And please, Brother DiMolante.
And I appreciate how the meeting workbook mentions that true empathy is shown even in our gestures or what we do. So I appreciated how Nita was ready to start to study, but as soon as she heard how stressed Jade was, she actually put her iPad down and looked at her.
Very nice. Thank you. And Brother Garcia.
I also like to point how Nita wasn't strictly about the study, but it was about how her student was doing. So to be able to show personal interest or empathy, it is important to be flexible and reasonable to our students.
That's a very good point. Now let's move on to our third question. How did Nita show empathy when Jade said that she really wasn't very organized? Let's start with Sister Engel, please.
I appreciated that she, as the information mentioned, offered practical assistance. She said, I can help, but then she said, I mean, if you want me to. So she wasn't pushy about it, but she was genuine in wanting to do something practical for her.
Very nice. Thank you for bringing out those points. Please, the O'Brien family.
And then she followed through with her. It wasn't like, well, this is what you should do. This is how you should organize. But she actually went to her apartment, which could be daunting, and helped her to really kind of organize and straighten things up, which goes a long way for the Bible student to see that.
Very nice. And Sister Peters, please.
I also like how her facial expressions were all positive, and it reflected just her sincere desire to help her.
Very nice. So friends, that little video, short though it was powerful, wasn't it? It helped us to see that showing empathy, it's much more than just a technique that we use in the ministry. It is genuine, heartfelt interest that's reflected in how we listen, how we speak, in our face and in our body language. We really, truly do want to try and understand the interests, beliefs, circumstances of our student or of the person we're talking to. Now, as you mentioned, that careful observation oftentimes will lead to us providing practical suggestions to help, assistance, just like Nita did with Jade. But also, like Nita did, we won't pressure our students to make changes for us. No, we allow them to respond. And when we do, well, they do respond in time, and it increases our joy in the ministry. It's a guarantee from Jehovah. Thank you, friends, for your beautiful comments.
Thank you so much, Brother Peters. That was well done. Thank you for helping us to grasp more fully what empathy is and how we can show it in our ministry. We definitely enjoy the ongoing saga of Nita and Jade, and we look forward to the next segment of their story. Well, that takes us to our initial call video, and our publishers this week will be using a new presentation with the question, how do we know that our suffering is not punishment from God? So let's watch, and we'll entertain a few questions as we go along.
Good morning. My name is Francisco, and this is Shane. May I ask your name?
Ian.
It's nice to meet you, Ian. We're discussing a question that many people ask about God.
God? I don't think I believe in God.
So friends, how would you reply to this potential conversation stopper? Sister Engel, please.
Well, you could tell from the tone of voice that there was a story there and he had a reason why he felt that way. So asking him if he's always felt that way and trying to understand why could help figure out where to go with the conversation.
Excellent. So let's see how our publisher proceeds.
You're certainly not alone in questioning whether God exists. But may I ask, have you always felt that way?
Well, I used to believe in God. I was raised that way. But then everything fell apart. My mother got sick, and my father left us. It was just me and my brother trying to take care of Mom until she died.
I'm very sorry to hear that, Ian.
Me too. I can relate in some ways. My family went through a similar situation. I just don't understand why God would do that to us. We're good people. We went to church every Sunday. We never hurt anyone.
Let me assure you, you're certainly not the first to feel that way. Many people have struggled to understand why bad things happened. The Bible's answer may surprise you. In fact, that's one of the reasons we're here today. The question we've been discussing from the Bible is, how do we know that our suffering is not punishment from God?
Really?
Yes.
So brothers and sisters, how did the publishers demonstrate warmth and empathy when they heard Ian's story? Brother Wright, please.
One very practical way was that they let him know that he was not alone in feeling the way that he did. And that really helped to establish common ground with the householder.
Very good. And Sister Reimer.
And they both expressed sympathy. They said they were sorry. It really validated that he had a cause to feel hurt. It didn't challenge what he was feeling.
Yes. And Sister Stallo, please.
I noticed also it wasn't just the words they said, but the way they said it. So their tone was very warm. It was their vowels were drawn out, so it wasn't clipped and short, so you could show they're expressing empathy in that way.
Good. And one more comment, Sister Hines, please.
And even their physical expressions, one of the brothers even dropped his head as he was listening to the tragedies that the brother had, or the householder had gone through.
Yes, very good. So let's watch the remainder of the presentation.
Please notice what we read here at James 1:13. When under trial, let no one say, I'm being tried by God. For with evil things, God cannot be tried, nor does he himself try anyone. Notice the first part of this verse. When we face trials, we may feel like we're being tried or tested by God. But is that really the case? Notice the second part of the verse. Will you agree that if God exists, he cannot be tested by evil?
Of course. That would be impossible.
We agree. And what comforting assurance do we find in the end of the verse?
That God does not try us with evil?
Exactly. Of course, a logical question is, if God isn't the cause of our suffering, who or what is? Next time we're here, let's discuss the principal reason why we suffer.
Okay.
So we appreciate being prepared for the coming month's activities with that presentation, and again, a great lesson in how to display empathy. Would you like to see that presentation demonstrated live? Let's see what happens when Sister Cameron Gross uses the same question with her householder, Sister Judith DiMolanta.
Hello, this is Judy.
Hello, Judy. My name is Cameron, and I'm a volunteer in the area calling briefly to share good news with my neighbors. Even though many are going back to somewhat of a normal, there is no doubt that we all have had to go through unusual challenges in this last year. How are you and your family adjusting?
Yeah, we're getting by. Thank you. We just need to trust in God and hope that things will work out, I guess.
Yes, having trust in God is very important. Thank you for sharing that, Judy. Would you not agree that one of the best ways we can build that trust is to go to His Word to find answers to the questions that we have?
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Me too. And you know, in these times that we live, many search for answers, yet they still struggle to truly find out why things are the way they are. Quite a few scriptures found in the Bible talk about suffering, including its source. When under trial, though, we may feel like many who wonder why God would cause the suffering in their life. But is our suffering punishment from God? Notice what God's word answers at James chapter 1, verse 13, which reads, When under trial, let no one say, I am being tried by God. For with evil things, God cannot be tried, nor does he himself try anyone. So in this verse, Judy, it says that God cannot be tried or tested by evil. But how does the end of this verse help us see that our suffering is not punishment from God?
It said that God doesn't try anyone, or I guess test them.
Exactly. And that is God's assurance to us. Really, suffering was never a part of God's purpose for mankind. Is that not a comforting thought that can help us to build our trust in God?
Yeah, it really is.
I agree with you, Judy. But that does leave the question, if God isn't the cause of suffering, then what or who is? Perhaps when I call back, I can share another thought from God's word to answer that question.
Okay, sounds good. I'd like that.
Thank you, Sister Gross and Sister DiMolanta. That was well done. Sister Gross, you were working on study 1, effective introduction. What makes an introduction effective? Well, one of the aspects mentioned in our teaching brochure is that we need to adapt what we say to the practical needs of our listeners. Many of us may have been wondering, how are we going to go from the pandemic when everyone is locked down at home to the time when people are more free and they're going about their normal activities? Well, you built that into your presentation. You acknowledge that that's happening. and then you expressed concern and asked how your householder was doing. So that drew her in. It showed empathy and concern for her, and then you were able to build on her comment about trusting in God by going to the scripture. So we appreciated, again, that excellent presentation, and thank you again for helping us see how we can use that question in our ministry this month. Well, that takes us to our Living as Christians portion of the meeting. We'd like to begin with a song. It's Song 103 entitled Shepherds, Gifts and Men, based on Ephesians 4:8. Well, we're eager to hear our local needs talk. It will be delivered by Brother Ramon Hines, and the theme that he'll develop is comments that build up. Brother Hines.
I really enjoyed your comment. Well, likely you've commended someone in your congregation after a congregation meeting that way. Your comment regarding that comment likely brought joy to your fellow believer's heart. As an example, a Christian brother who stutters severely was very reluctant to offer a comment at a Christian meeting. He wrote this: "When attending meetings, I used to say to myself, if only I could give a comment like the others. Eventually, I did, but how I battled to get those few words out. After the meeting concluded, many came over and commended me. They made me feel like a soccer player who had just scored a goal." Good comments have a positive effect on all in the congregation. A good comment can refresh. A good comment can encourage. A good comment has the power to build up. Thus, in our local needs this week, we will answer 4 key questions. First, why can we say that a good comment is like a well-built house? Second, did God's servants in ancient Israel believe that it was important to offer comments? Third, was offering good comments an important aspect of pure worship in the first century? And finally, the fourth one, what can help us to offer comments that build others up? Well, that first question, why can we say that a good comment is like a well-built house? Well, because a good comment, like a well-constructed house, usually is the result of hard work. Jesus, in his Sermon on the Mount, explained why hard work was time well spent during a construction project. Do you recall what he said about a certain man who neglected to put in the hard work in building his house? In time, 3 powerful external forces exposed that worker's lack of diligence. Let's read about it together in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 7. That's Matthew chapter 7 and verse 27. There we read, "And the rain poured down, and the floods came, and the winds blew and struck against that house, and it caved in, and its collapse was great." Did you note those 3 external forces that made that house cave in? The verse mentioned rain, floods, and winds. Well, like the man in Jesus' parable, servants of Jehovah have long contended with powerful figurative external forces. Even in ancient times, this was the case. 3 common challenges include temptation to participate in sexual immorality, persecution at the hand of opposers, and bereavement due to the loss of a loved one in death. Like a driving rain or floods or winds, such forces easily could have begun to tear down true worshipers, physically, emotionally, and yes, even spiritually. For example, King David admitted to experiencing such feelings of anxiety when he had to endure persecution from cruel opposers. At Psalm 22:14, David indicated that he was so discouraged that it was as if his heart melted like wax. Yet I invite you to turn with me, please, to that Psalm, Psalm 22, and there, please take note of what David was still determined to do in spite of the anxiety he felt. And we might add, this verse will help us answer our second question. Did God's servants in ancient Israel believe that it was important to offer comments? That's Psalm 22, and we'll read verse 22. There David said, "I will declare your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you." Well, did you note? What was it that strengthened David during his time of trial? Well, rather than focusing on his own problems, he sought opportunities to speak about Jehovah. To unbelievers? To those who did not yet know God? No. Look at the A portion again. The verse says that David was determined to declare God's name to his brothers. And apparently it wasn't just a small group of individuals, because the verse goes on to tell us that he said that he would praise Jehovah in the midst of the congregation. However, this verse, Psalm 22, is of particular interest to us. Why is that so? Well, because our publications have explained that this was prophetically pointing forward to David's most prominent descendant, that is Jesus Christ. Did Jesus also seize opportunities to offer comments that built others up? We'll consider an example. We'll turn in our Bibles now to the book of Luke. This is a situation where Jesus was gathered at the temple with fellow believers. Now, it's possible that Luke gained knowledge of this event based on a firsthand account that he received directly from Jesus' mother, Mary. What took place when Jesus was 12 years old? In Luke chapter 2, Please follow along as we read what happened in verse number 47. Luke 2:47. It says, "But all those listening to him," that is 12-year-old Jesus, "were in constant amazement at his understanding and his answers." Yes, Jesus was no passive listener when he was gathered with his fellow worshipers. He actively participated by offering encouraging comments. As Jesus departed the temple with his parents, did someone or some lean down to young Jesus and ask and say, "You know, I really enjoyed your comment"? Well, we don't know. But what we do know is this: Jesus he used opportunities to give comments that built others up. When Jesus did this, he set an example for old and young alike. Well, that brings us to our third key question. What is it? Well, was offering good comments an important aspect of pure worship in the early Christian congregation? Well, to answer that question, we'll need to consider a local need that developed around the year 50 CE in a congregation that was located in a city that, according to Insight on the Scriptures, was in a thriving metropolis of quite some importance. The city was even named after the sister of Alexander the Great. What city was that? Thessalonica. What local need developed there? Well, the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians reveals that, among other things, the Christians there had to contend with powerful external forces. For example, 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 3 and 4 shows that their neighbors practiced and promoted sexual immorality. Chapter 2, verse 14 indicates that some fellow citizens persecuted Christians. And chapter 4, verses 13 and 14 tells us that a number in the congregation were very sad and low in spirit because of having recently lost loved ones in death. Can you personally identify with one or more of those figurative rains, floods, or windstorms? Since those trials threatened to tear down the faith of those true worshipers in Thessalonica, those early Christians needed someone to build them up. Who would Jehovah God assign to do so? Well, if you were serving there in the congregation in Thessalonica, you might have been very surprised at the answer that the Apostle Paul gave. Note the scripture there at 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and we'll read together verse number 11. And remember, the question is, who would God use to build them up? 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, "Therefore, keep encouraging one another and building one another up, just as you are in fact doing." Well, did you note those inspired words? Paul did not say that God would send down an angel from heaven, nor did he indicate that an apostle would come and visit the congregation. Rather, Jehovah saw fit to assign each Thessalonian Christian the privilege and responsibility to build up his fellow believer. But how did early Christians build one another up? Well, the October 15th, 2010 issue of the Watchtower, it quoted a secular source regarding first century congregations. Here's what it said: "Almost everyone came feeling that he had both the privilege and obligation of contributing something to the meeting. A man did not come with the sole intention of being a passive listener. He came not only to receive, but to give." What's the point? Well, secular history thus confirms that first century Christians who gathered for worship had the custom of offering comments, encouraging comments that would build up their fellow believers. Well, what about us today? Well, this leads to our fourth question. What can help us today to offer comments that build others up? Well, thankfully, God's organization has provided practical suggestions on this topic throughout the years. Such articles repeatedly have answered two questions. Namely, how often should we comment at the meetings? And two, what constitutes a good comment? First, let's answer the question, how often should we comment at a Christian meeting? Well, we should try to give at least one comment at every meeting. Of course, we won't be called on to give a comment every time we raise our hand, literally or virtually with Zoom. Therefore, it's best to prepare several comments. Have you ever noticed that at the congregation meetings, there's some that seem to always have the answers to the questions? Years ago, our school guidebook commented on this particular type of person in the congregation. And here's what it said. This is no accident. They may be drawing on years of study and association with Jehovah's people. But then it added this. But in most cases, preparation is also a major factor. Well, that reference reminds us of the truthfulness of Proverbs 15:28, which says that the heart of the righteous one meditates before answering, or as the footnote reads, carefully considers how to answer. What about that second question? What constitutes a good comment? Well, the October 2016 Our Christian Life and Ministry meeting workbook explained that a good comment is simple and clear. In most cases, it can be offered in 30 minutes or 30 seconds or less. It's given in our own words. A good comment is not a needless repetition of a previous comment. As you can note from the screen, the meeting workbook also included practical instructions on how to comment. How to comment if you're called on first, or if the question has already been answered. Could you set aside time to review that entire article as part of your family worship or personal study evening? Well, of course, preparation is one thing. What if offering a comment is just something that stresses us out? It fills us with anxiety. Well, God's word comes to the rescue again. Please turn in your Bible to 1 Peter chapter 4. And rather than going at it alone when we're trying to offer comments that build up, note what verse 11 says, the A portion. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 11 says, if anyone speaks, let him do so as speaking pronouncements from God. If anyone ministers, let him do so depending on the strength that God supplies. Yes, this verse reminds us that when we desire to open our mouths and offer praise to Jehovah, he can supply us with the strength and courage we need to speak. So then, as we've seen, the various trials that the Christians in Thessalonica faced easily might have discouraged them. They easily could have torn them down. To keep that from happening, each member of the congregation needed to accept his privilege and responsibility to encourage one another, to build one another up. Well, why has this been the subject of our local needs? That was their local need. Why for us today? Well, it is because you and I are living in the last of the last days. Critical times hard to deal with. We're facing all manner of rain, winds, and floods, sometimes in a literal sense. We need encouragement now more than ever. Little wonder, Hebrews 10:25 urges us not to forsake the meeting of ourselves together, but rather to keep on encouraging one another, and all the more so as we see Jehovah's Day drawing near. Therefore, may these suggestions that we've reviewed today help each one of us to resist any tendency that we may have to become passive listeners at our meetings. Instead, we want to rely on the strength that God supplies to help us shoulder our privilege and responsibility to offer comments that build others up. And when we do, may our observant Heavenly Father agree with anyone who afterwards kindly says to us, I really enjoyed your comment.
Brother Hines, thank you so much for that warm discussion of the history of commenting in true worship and for showing us in practical ways how we can construct a comment that builds up. Well, our congregation Bible study this week continues with chapter 9 of our Pure Worship book and Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones. Let's give our attention to our conductor, Brother Isaiah Miller, and our reader, Brother Chad Wright.
Well, as Brother Engel mentioned, our Bible study continues this discussion in chapter 10 of our Pure Worship book, You Will Come to Life. And this dramatic vision that Ezekiel had of the valley full of dry bones. What an experience Ezekiel was taken through with this vision. But what did it all mean? Well, our paragraphs tonight begin to pull this vision together to flesh it out for us, both with the initial fulfillment with ancient Israel and the larger fulfillment in more recent times. And we'll see how exciting it is for you and I to be able to experience in our time the amazing fulfillment of this prophetic vision. So we're going to pick up our lesson in paragraph 8, and Brother Chad Wright is our reader. So let's go ahead and have paragraph 8 read.
How have the ancient nation of Israel experienced the fulfillment of the gloomy part of this prophetic vision? The symbolic demise of Israel had already begun in 740 BCE with the fall and exile of the 10-tribe kingdom. Some 130 years later, when the people of Judah were also deported, the whole house of Israel was in captivity. Symbolically speaking, the whole group of exiles were then as dead as the bones seen in Ezekiel's vision. Also recall that Ezekiel saw not just bones, but very dry bones, which indicated that their death-like condition continued for a long time. And indeed, for Israel and Judah combined, it lasted over 200 years, from 740 to 537 BCE.
Okay, so our first question there for paragraph 8, how was the whole house of Israel in a death-like condition? Brother Garcia, please.
Just like the paragraph mentions, it all started in the year 740 BCE when the 10 tribes of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians. Then it continued with the rest of the house of Israel, the 2-tribe kingdom of Judah, which were conquered 130 years later by the Babylonians.
Very nice. Excellent summary. And Peters, Sister Peters?
Also in Ezekiel's vision, it said that the bones were very dry, which indicated that their death-like condition continued for a long time. In Jeremiah 50:33, it said that the Israelites and the Judeans were oppressed and that their captives held onto them and refused to let them go. And this was true for their captivity lasted over 200 years.
Very nice. Thanks for bringing that verse in to see how this really was a death-like condition that they found themselves in. Before we ask our B question, maybe we can get someone to read Ezekiel 37:9. Could we get a volunteer for that? Sister Wright, please.
It says, he then said to me, prophesy to the wind, prophesy, son of man, and say to the wind, this is what the sovereign Lord Jehovah says. From the 4 winds come in, O wind, and blow upon these people who were killed so that they may come to life.
Thank you, Sister Wright. So how does Ezekiel 37:9 indicate the cause of Israel's symbolic death? And feel free to use the footnote if you like in your comments. Sister Stella.
Well, we see here in Ezekiel 37:9 that they were killed. So they didn't die of natural causes, but this symbolic killing actually, this death-like captivity started, as was mentioned earlier, when the northern 10-tribe kingdom of Israel was taken captive by the Assyrians, and then later in 607, when the 2-tribe kingdom of Judah was taken into exile in Babylon.
Very nice, thank you. And Brother Ward.
And comparing this verse with verse 11 really helps us be sure that it's referring to a symbolic death. It's true the Babylonians had just conquered and destroyed Jerusalem, but verse 11 refers to the whole house of Israel. So it was a symbolic death.
Yeah, nice detail there. Very good. Brother Dimalanta.
And this symbolic death, we can see also lasted for some time. We appreciated specifically mentioned there that in this vision that those bones were not just dry, but they were very dry bones. And we can see how that correlates because this combined time that both Israel and Judah were in captivity was over 200 years.
Excellent. Let's move on to paragraph 9.
Restoration prophecies concerning Israel, such as the one spoken by Ezekiel, have a larger fulfillment. Just as the ancient nation of natural Israel was killed and remained symbolically dead for a considerable time, so the Israel of God, the anointed Christian congregation, was killed symbolically and experienced death-like captivity for a long time. In fact, the captivity of the anointed congregation as a whole continued for so long that their spiritual condition could well be compared to that of bones that were very dry. As explained in the preceding chapter, the captivity of the anointed Christian congregation began in the 2nd century CE and lasted for many centuries, just as Jesus had indicated in his kingdom illustration of the wheat and the weeds.
Yeah, question there. What similarities are there between the experiences of ancient natural Israel and those of the Israel of God? Sister Engel.
So in both cases, they experienced a symbolic killing, a symbolic death that really was their captivity. And in both cases, this condition lasted for a long period of time.
Excellent. Good. And Brother Peters.
Just on that point of it, the bones were very dry. That was part of the prophecy. And we see that happened in the case of spiritual Israel. Their captivity, as was prophesied, began in the 2nd century and lasted for many centuries. So we think 200 years was a long time for natural Israel, but we're talking centuries of time for spiritual Israel.
Excellent. Very good. Can anyone help us with what our previous understanding of this was and how it's been clarified? We just heard that the understanding that we have now. Brother Engel, please.
So previously we believed that the captivity of the anointed to Babylon the Great began in 1918 and then ended in 1919. But a closer examination of Ezekiel's vision and of Jesus' illustration of the wheat and the weeds showed us that that captivity had to last much longer. So as Brother Peter said, now we understand that it began in the 2nd century and ended in 1919.
Excellent summary of that. Very good. And if we pull up the illustration that we have there that correlates with this paragraph, looking at this illustration, how does this clarified understanding really make so much sense for us? Kind of reiterate some of those points that were already made so well. Brother Ward.
Well, it really is this aspect that these bones are just very, very dry. It really shows it had to be a long period of time. And that lines up very well with what Jesus said, that the weeds would overtake the wheat, and it would be that way all the way until the harvest. And that matches up with what Ezekiel saw, bones that had been dry and there for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. When we think about it, that earlier understanding was just talking about several months, but looking at this is obviously a long time, as was mentioned. Excellent. Sister Miller, please.
Oh, I was just going to comment again just on that illustration, because it's amazing, the artist's rendition of it, because you can really see, you can feel how hot it is, like looking around, and you can see like the dust really, and just the heat of how dry it was. So amazing. We keep talking about this, how dramatic this must have been, as we're going to go on further, for him to actually be there to experience this in person, this vision.
Absolutely. Nice details there. And Sister Wright.
And too, that this wasn't just some time period where Jehovah's people had slowed down in their activity, but this was actually a death-like state of captivity. So really just indicating to what extent that this inactivity really went. It was as if they were non-existent for that period of time.
Good, and we'll see some more details, as was mentioned, as we move along. Brother Harris, please.
And also, looking at the imagery, you see how dry the bones were. There was nothing to identify each person, but as you see there, it was all just together. There was no identifying factor. Especially, we see this happening when the death light happened to the Christian congregation as well. they kind of lost the identifying factor, just like the dry bones.
Very nice observation. Appreciate that. Okay. So now let's talk about how this dramatic vision unfolds. So our next subheading is really going to help us to understand this a little bit further. Bones began to come together. So let's have paragraph 10 read.
In ancient times, Jehovah foretold that his people would experience a progressive restoration to life. So, what were some of the factors that gradually restored to God-fearing exiles the faith that their hope of returning to Israel would be fulfilled? One source of hope must have been the prophetic statements made by earlier prophets. For example, Isaiah had foretold that a remnant, a holy seed, would return to the land. Also, the many prophecies of restoration that Ezekiel had written down no doubt kept that hope alive. Further, the presence in Babylon of such faithful men as the prophet Daniel, as well as the amazing fall of the city of Babylon in 539 BCE, must have bolstered the exiles' hope of return.
Could we get a reader for the two verses mentioned in our question there, Ezekiel 37, verses 7 and 8? So we have this context clear. Brother Peters, please.
Ezekiel 37, 7 and 8. Then I prophesied, just as I had been commanded. As soon as I prophesied, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones began to come together, bone to bone. Then I saw sinews and flesh come on them, and skin covered over them, but there was still no breath in them.
Thank you, Brother Peters. So what development regarding God's people was foretold at Ezekiel 37, 7 and 8? Brother Soler, please.
Well, we can see from these verses that these bones didn't come back to life instantly. It was a gradual progression. There were steps to it. And in a similar way, in the fulfillment of this vision, there was going to be a progression.
Excellent. Very good. And Sister Dimalanta.
So as the brother mentioned, Ezekiel was able to observe and make out each step of this process. He first heard a rattling sound as the bones started to come together, each to its proper location. Then they were reattached with sinew and flesh, and then skin. So he was able to witness this progressive restoration to life.
Nice details. Appreciate that. Okay, our B question asks, what factors must have gradually restored the faith of God-fearing exiles? Sister Peters.
One source of hope must have been prophetic statements. For example, Isaiah 6:13 foretold that a tenth, a holy seed, will remain, just like a stump of a massive tree that is cut down. This assurance no doubt comforted them that in time it will spread again, the tree will regrow, and they would be able to return.
Very good. Thanks for bringing out that parallel prophecy there in Isaiah. And Brother Stallo.
We also had, as mentioned in the paragraph, that the prophet Daniel and other faithful men were present in Babylon. And with Daniel, what was interesting is that he was in a prominent position through not one regime, but two regimes. So you could see that Jehovah's hand was definitely there protecting him and protecting the exiles there in Babylon.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Sister Engel.
And then as their deliverance got closer, when the city of Babylon fell in 539, which would have been such an amazing occurrence from the strong city that seemed unconquerable, then they would have had another glimmer of hope. This really is going to happen.
Yeah, very good. All right, let's have before we move on, Brother Dimalanta, please.
I was just going to mention how we appreciated last week, we saw the picture of the change in attitude they had when they heard about the things that were happening in Jerusalem, and no doubt how disappointed they may have felt. But now we see all these things starting to happen and their hope starting to come back. It's almost as if Ezekiel, as we saw in the vision, was right there, hearing, seeing these bones come together, and it really does set up a nice the fulfillment of the prophecy in the future.
Yeah, very nice. Good. All right, now let's have paragraphs 11 and 12 read.
How did a similar gradual restoration occur among the Israel of God, the anointed Christian congregation? Many centuries into the long period of death-like captivity, a noise, a rattling sound, was heard as God-fearing individuals rose up in behalf of true worship. For instance, in the 16th century, William Tyndale prepared a Bible translation in English. The Roman Catholic clergy were angered that the Bible could now be read by the common man. Tyndale was killed. Even so, other courageous individuals continued to produce Bible translations in additional languages, and spiritual light gradually spread throughout the dark world. Later, when Charles T. Russell and his associates began to work zealously to restore Bible truths, it was as if sinews and flesh came on the bones. Zion's Watchtower and other publications helped honest-hearted ones to discover spiritual truths, which moved them to join themselves to God's anointed servants. In the early 1900s, God's anointed people were further energized by such tools as the photodrama of creation and the book The Finished Mystery. Shortly thereafter, God's time came to make his people stand on their feet. When and how did that occur? Events that took place in ancient Babylon help us to answer that question.
Our A question there is, how did a gradual restoration occur among the Israel of God? Sister Ward.
So the first step in the gradual restoration was a symbolic noise, a rattling sound. And this happened when individuals who were God-fearing rose up on behalf of true worship. And we see the example of William Tyndale, who prepared a Bible translation in English in the 16th century.
Excellent. And the Reimers, please.
And this persisted, even though there was opposition and Tyndale was killed. That wasn't going to stop this gradual restoration because others followed.
Very good. Let's go to our teaching box there. Pure worship gradually restored, and we see this sequence of how this happened. So can we get a comment or two on maybe a little bit of the context there of paragraph 9 told us that there was a spiritual captivity of the Israel of God, and that lasted for many centuries. What were conditions like for the average person during that time of spiritual captivity? Brother Stallo.
Well, as was brought out, the Bible was not widely available. In fact, it was almost impossible to read God's word. So it would make sense that the Bible being available would be one of the first steps to pure worship being restored, because you wouldn't know how to worship God unless you could read his word. So the fact that Tyndale and others prepared Bible translations that allowed a wider audience to be able to examine it really shows that that is a clear indication of pure worship being able to be restored.
Yeah, very good. Brother Peters.
When you think about the environment back then for these true Christians that were living in these what was described as dark times, you were considered a heretic if you simply wanted to read the Bible. It's so foreign to us today, but these ones were truly persecuted for what they wanted to do. William Tyndale simply wanted to produce the Bible in a language that the everyday man could understand. But the clergy, in an attempt to maintain control and power over people's minds, maintained it in the old archaic languages that only they could understand and interpret. So we see Satan behind it, but we see what a truly dark time that was for true Christians.
Good. So we have the example of Tyndale with the English Bible. What other languages were made available during that period? You mentioned that for 1,000 years, it was only available in Latin, which most people didn't speak by that point. Sorry, this is an extra credit question. But within just a few years, we saw not just English, but French, Spanish, Dutch, Italian, and many other languages made available to the common person in their own language. And we know, as was mentioned, what risks were these men taking to make the Bible available? Brother Hines, if you had another comment, go ahead.
I was just going to comment on the paragraph there mentioned and how Jehovah's people were energized in the early 1900s. That picture also showed a picture of the photodrama of creation being advertised. It was presented in more than 9 million people in 1914 alone. That's more than we have as active publishers today. So we can see that definitely God's people were energized and being revived.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brother Ward.
And the whole sequence there that we see in the box reminds me of the song that opened up the Living as Christians section about shepherds, because we see Jehovah raising up shepherds to revive his people, brothers who were used to reveal and restore Bible truths and organize the preaching work.
Yeah, very good. And Brother Peters.
So then shortly thereafter, we see others being raised up as well, like Brother Russell. We see the sinews and the flesh starting to come over these bones that had come back together prophetically. So the publication of the Watchtower and many other publications moving forward, like Brother Hines mentioned with the photodrama of creation. So we truly see these bodies starting to take shape in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, very good. In fact, our paragraph mentioned the finished mystery book as well as part of that process of sinews attaching themselves to those bones. Interesting that the finished mystery was a study of the book of Ezekiel, right? So we see that parallel of what we're studying today. And how about as, of course, next week, we're going to discuss a little bit about that third point, but how do we see this progression continue there with the third part of our box? Sister Wright.
Well, as these spiritual truths began to come to light again, it was like these spiritual skeletons were taking place. And now all of a sudden there was more and more depth and Bible truth being restored, more and more people being taught. And now, as we see in the box, Jehovah's people just actively working to intensify their preaching efforts and adding more and more to the number of those that are teaching others then about these restored spiritual truths.
Very nice. So we see that army coming to their feet there. And Sister Miller.
And as we're going to get into this even deeper with the next week's discussion, it just really helps us appreciate the amazing truth that we have, that even what we're studying now would never have been put together if these other progressions did not happen. There's no way that we would have been able on our own to put these pieces together. So we really see that whole vision just coming together and how we're directly involved.
Nice mental picture there. Yep. And Brother O'Brien.
Yeah, along the same lines, we see Jehovah's hand throughout this whole process, because many of these early on, especially with Tyndale, they faced outright death, persecution, very, very effective persecution against Jehovah and against especially the Bible and his people. But we see Jehovah's hand always one step ahead, making sure that the bones were slowly, gradually coming alive as we're ready for it.
Yeah, very nice. And the rhymers.
I was thinking, reflecting on this, how appreciative we can be that of the understanding that we have now and how the light got brighter. Because I remember years ago thinking, man, a year and a half or a couple of years and boom, everything is all back together. But here you could see how logical it is that as we see clearly the understanding how Jehovah in control gradually brought his people back into a position where before the end of the system of things, they are ready to take on whatever comes in Satan's world. So it seems like it's a treasure to have this understanding right now.
Well said. Yeah, very true. In fact, we see that imagery there in our box, don't we? What Brother Reimer and others alluded to there in their comments, right? This darkness to light, the dark ages now to the spiritual light that we have today in Jehovah's organization. It's truly amazing. Before we ask our B question, maybe we can get a reader for Ezekiel 37:10. Brother Garcia, could you do that?
It says, "So I prophesied just as he commanded me, and the breath came into them, and they began to live and to stand on their feet, an extremely large army."
So a dramatic verse here. Thank you, Brother Garcia, for that. What question is raised by the statement found at Ezekiel 37:10? Sister Ward.
We saw that the prophecy said that God's people would live and stand on their feet. So the question is, when and how did that occur?
It's a good question, isn't it? Very good. So really, that's the question that we're going to consider next week as we continue with the subheading, they began to live and stand on their feet. So what an exciting prophetic vision that we're discussing in this chapter. And as we mentioned at the outset, how exciting it is that we're living through the fulfillment of this prophetic vision. So thanks to everyone for their excellent participation. It really helped us to understand this deep, thrilling prophetic vision even more. And thank you, Brother Wright, too, for your excellent reading. Now we'll give our attention back to our chairman.
Thank you so much, Brother Miller, for your excellent teaching tonight. And Brother Wright, your reading definitely helped us better understand the meaning of this amazing vision that Ezekiel had. Well, I'm sure you'll agree that it's been most refreshing to be here today. In our Treasures Talk, Brother Ward helped us to understand the kind of worship that Jehovah wants. He wants us to serve him not like a waiter who serves at a restaurant, but as a loving child who serves his parents out of that deep love that he has for them. Beautiful illustration, Brother Ward. And didn't we appreciate the reminders that we got to display empathy in our ministry? As we learned, it's not just a technique, but it's a reflection of how we really feel about the people that we're speaking to. People need to hear the good news of the kingdom, and our empathy may be just the thing that motivates them to listen. I think all of us have a renewed appreciation for the privilege of commenting at our meetings. And I must say, all of you set an excellent example today in well thought out and encouraging comments. So thank you again. And we appreciate how Brother Miller helped us to understand the reason for our adjustment in our understanding of Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones. Those bones were very dry, indicating that the spiritual captivity of the anointed stretched out over many centuries. And we look forward to a further discussion of that vision next week. But what else can we expect next week? Well, our Treasures Talk will answer these questions. How did the Mosaic Law give insight into Jehovah's view of the poor? And how can we imitate his concern for the poor? The law also prohibited the Israelites from boiling a young goat in its mother's milk. Why? And what does that teach us about Jehovah? We'll find out in our gems. In our Living as Christians portion, we'll see that Jehovah's view of the poor has not changed. And in a beautiful video, we'll see how our brothers in Congo are living proof that we need never be anxious about material things if we seek the kingdom first. But all of that is next week. What about this weekend? Are you looking forward to week 2 of our Powerful by Faith regional convention? I know I am. We'll be viewing the Friday afternoon session this weekend with the continuing theme, Give Us More Faith, based on Luke 17:5. The program this weekend will feature 2 powerful symposiums. The first one is entitled, Use Creation to Build Your Faith. How do Jehovah's creations show us his ability and desire to fulfill his promises for the future? We'll find out in that symposium. The second symposium has the theme, Imitate the Faithful, Not the Faithless. It's a study in contrasts. For example, why should we imitate Abel and not Cain, Noah and not his neighbors? Those are just 2 of the 5 contrasts that we'll learn from. And then the session will end with a talk entitled, Keep Testing Whether You Are in the Faith. How? We hope that you'll be well rested and ready for this spiritual feast this weekend. Before we conclude, there's one announcement from the branch that we'd like to share with you regarding the rotation of circuit overseer assignments. It reads this way. A rotation of circuit overseer assignments will not take place in September 2021. In general, circuit overseers will remain in their current assignments through the 2022 service year. We know that you will continue to confirm your deep appreciation for your circuit overseer and, if married, his wife. Well, again, we're grateful to Jehovah and his organization for making this meeting possible. for the good preparation of those who had parts, and for those who lovingly worked behind the scenes to make it a success. To conclude our meeting, we like to sing a song of praise to Jehovah, Song 72, Making Known the Kingdom Truth, based on Acts 20, verses 20 and 21. And then Brother Matthew O'Brien will conclude with prayer. That's Song 72.